Chapter 1, the where, why, and how of data collection. In this video, we'll be focused on the different data collection methods companies often use to gather data. The first form of data collection we'll talk about is experiments. An experiment is a process that produces a single outcome whose result cannot be predicted with certainty. That's why we run the experiment, to see what happens. Now, with experimental design, this is when we actually look at a particular variable of interest and then examine one or more factors to manipulate, change, or observe to see the impact that variable of interest can have in terms of being measured or observed. Another form of data collection technique that you might be familiar with is phone surveys. Typical applications include political polls, market research, customer satisfaction surveys, and even healthcare studies. Some of the issues with phone surveys, though, is that people will screen their calls to avoid them. Sometimes respondents are not home, and it also requires trained callers to consistently conduct the surveys. What we'll actually focus on a bit more is written questionnaires and surveys, and direct observation and personal interviews. One thing to note is that phone surveys and written questionnaire surveys are very similar in structure. They both include identifying an issue to study, identifying the population of interest or the participants that we want to study, developing questions to ask, testing the survey or piloting it before you send it out to the broader group, figuring out the appropriate sample size and sampling method, and then picking your sample and then sending out the surveys or making your phone calls. Some key differences between written questionnaires and phone surveys is that it must be carefully formatted. So it has to look professional, easy to read, with clear directions. Otherwise, people won't want to take it. There also needs to be a motivational statement of purpose because, unlike a phone survey where you can try to verbally convince someone to participate, your written questionnaire must have a convincing purpose statement. With written questionnaires, you can also ask open-ended questions. And we'll look at some examples of what open-ended questions are. And it's also less expensive to administer. We can easily distribute email questionnaires or written questionnaires versus having trained callers conduct the surveys. Some typical applications are employee satisfaction surveys at companies. You've likely taken a course or instructor evaluation, customer satisfaction studies. Sometimes at the end of a receipt, it asks you to do a survey, and then also academic research. Now, some of the key advantages with written questionnaires is that they are standardized for all respondents. So we're asking consistent questions of everyone. If it's online, the data can be captured electronically and more easily downloaded for analysis purposes, and you can potentially ask more questions. Some of the disadvantages is that the responses returned may not be timely. Think about the last time you received a survey. Did you answer it the moment you received it, or did you wait a while? Another major disadvantage of a written survey is that the response rates are extremely low because people don't like taking surveys. And then there's also no chance to clarify questions. So if a survey is unclear and the respondent wants to ask a question, they don't have anyone to contact. Now, some of the key types of questions you should be aware of are demographic questions, which are related to respondents' backgrounds, characteristics, and attributes. An example of this might be, what is your race or ethnicity? A closed-ended question is where respondents get to choose from a short list of defined choices. In other words, it's a multiple choice question. So for instance, to which political party do you belong? Republican, Democratic, or other? With open-ended questions, respondents have the freedom to respond with any value words or statements. So an example might be, why did you choose to attend Maricosta College? Let's look at two questions and see which one is better. A states, do you agree with most other reasonably minded people that the city should spend more money on neighborhood parks? Or B, in your opinion, should the city increase spending on neighborhood parks? In this case, B is the better question because A is loaded with bias. It's guilting the respondent to answer in a particular way by highlighting that other reasonably minded people think we should spend more money on parks. What about these two questions? Which one is better? A, how much money do you make at your job? Or B, which of the following categories best reflects your weekly income from your current job? Under 500, between 500 and 1,000, or over 1,000? If you said B, you're right. With A, it's too vague. It doesn't specify, is it annual, hourly, monthly, or weekly? Whereas with B, it specifies a time frame, and it's close-ended in that it gives you options to choose from. And in particular, with income questions, respondents may be sensitive to providing detailed information. Another form of data collection is observations. With direct observations, you are physically observing what's going on and recording what takes place. This can be subjective and time consuming though. So for instance, I'm subjective towards moms with kids now. Before having a child, I didn't really notice pregnant women or children. But now, after having a child, when I look around, all I see are families and moms and kids. Typical applications might be determining what customers like, so salespeople on the floor can observe what customers are picking up and trying on or putting back. You can also observe seatbelt use if you've ever been stopped at a checkpoint for your seatbelt. And in companies, it can also be used to assess compliance to company safety policies. So, for instance, if you work in a lab, you can get inspected and observed to see if you're wearing your appropriate safety equipment like lab coats and eyewear. Another form of data collection is interviews. So with personal interviews, you can have structured, where your questions are scripted, or unstructured, where you start with one or two questions and then follow up based on the responses you get from the participant. Typical applications for interviews are customer satisfaction, supplier qualifications, and health status. So if you've ever gone to a doctor and a nurse or a doctor asks you questions about your health, they are interviewing you. Other data collection techniques that you might encounter are focus groups. So this is a group interview where the facilitator is trying to understand the group's perspective or opinions on something. And in general, with focus groups, you're looking for a group that has some common attributes. Perhaps your focus group includes all parents because you want to understand their concerns about daycare. Companies often study documents and records. Data is being collected through their different systems, and analysts will go through and analyze the data available. Finance folks also will analyze information to create annual reports and financial records. In this course, you will be analyzing secondary data from a company called Airbnb. As you read through Chapter 1, make sure to pay attention to the data collection issues that you should be aware of. There are always issues whenever we're collecting data. Whether it's data accuracy, how good is the data that comes in is how good the results will come out. Interviewer bias, so as an interviewer, are you biased towards a particular outcome or position? Non-responsive bias is just when participants don't respond because they don't want to or they're not interested. Selection bias is where we may be selecting a certain type of participant, and that only gives us a narrow view of information. Observer bias, as I mentioned with observations, might be something that you are particularly focused on because it's related to you. Measurement error is where we may be collecting data using measurement tools, and there may be an issue with the tool itself. With data collection, internal and external validity are also very important. Internal validity is where data is collected in a way that we can eliminate effects of variables within the experimental environment that we don't actually care about. In other words, we're able to take away the noise that might affect our data. External validity is if we could take our results and generalize it beyond the test environment. So if we repeat the experiment in other contexts, will we still get the same results? So make sure you understand the data collection issues as you'll be identifying these for your project in the future. If you have any questions, just let me know.